I'm Scott, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the Rock Love Podcast, where we celebrate the magazine that I was fortunate enough to run between 1995 and 2001, rock and roll in general, music that we love, bands, remembrances. We get into what's happening today that we love, all kinds of great stuff over the course of this whole podcast series. But today we actually have a bit of a theme. So, hey, Jeff, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Greg, thanks.
Ready
I'm
to
great to see you again. Thanks for joining me. So, what I asked both of us to do was to come up with six albums from our lives that had major influences on us, either as starting to get you into something, in Jeff's case, into musicianship, because he's a musician as well. In my case, things that influenced me and may have changed my life or were unusual choices for where I was at the time, et cetera, et cetera. The most important thing, as always, is we get into it and just tell stories. So, all right, I'm going to go first. So,
Okay.
um, my first one is from the mid 1980s. And at the time, I was kind of phasing out of what was going on with new music at the time. I was getting a little bored, except for maybe, Depeche Mode and The Cure. But this is when I started my um, crawling back into classic rock phase because I just was unhappy with the music that was going on at the time. And I was not a big fan of music soundtracks from films or whatnot. I always knew they were there, and obviously were the spice of what made a great movie happen. But I wasn't one of these people that I know that some people who incessantly listen to movie soundtracks over and over and over, which now I totally get and understand, and guilty. I do so myself at the time as well. However, in 1984, I believe it was, what has since become my favorite movie of all time, still to this day, called Once Upon a Time in America, came out. And it was Sergio Leone's last final film. And it touched me in many ways because it wasn't just a mafia story, but it was about a bunch of punk thug Jewish gangsters from Brooklyn and the Lower East Side. And so I related to it a little more. However, as great as the movie was, what made this movie rock was the score by Ennio Morricone, which, with all the great things that this guy did in the spaghetti westerns and whatnot, I encourage everybody to go back and take a listen to this soundtrack from Once Upon a Time in America, because it is just beauty from start to finish, and it's anchored by this song called Deborah's Theme. And Deborah was played by like Jennifer Connelly, who you could tell was going to be frigging gorgeous even at the time. And she's dancing in this music, and like I said, there was something about it spiritually that hit me in the moment that even to this day, I go back and listen to it. And in fact, with another project I was working on, with which Jeff was also a part of, about our time when we worked together in fashion retail, when I was speaking to the guy who scored the films, I would always say to him, I want it to sound like this. And I would always constantly play him cuts from this soundtrack. So do you have anything you have to add about that movie? Or because Jeff and I are talking about our choices for the first time here. We did not give each other our list. So what
Yeah,
do you
no,
think?
so I mean, I'd probably have to go back and rewatch that, but by you saying that, that's really cool because it's like there's so much music out there. And I've been kind of in this mode of going back and listening to all these great, albums, soundtracks, as you even said. So I'm actually writing this down because I'm like, okay, this is great. I need to go back and re-listen to this because it sounds like it obviously influenced you a lot. That's
And
pretty
it
cool.
was
But yeah,
it
I
was
didn't
like
know. So
this. It was this epitome of Morricone's career. Because again, if you listen to the spaghetti westerns, they had that very distinctive sound. This was
right.
not that. I mean, the Once Upon a Time in America score was very different and much more orchestral and a lot less. You know how he was very
Right.
playful with his score in those spaghetti westerns, and this was just traditional is not the word, but it was very ethnic, I guess, between his Italian roots and trying to do the New York Jewish thing and everything.
Yeah.
But like I say, from the moment I saw the movie instantly, even over the Godfather films, became my favorite film of all time, and still is. But the soundtrack literally changed my life, and continues to do so to this day.
That's awesome. That is unlikely. I would not have picked that for one of your
There you
top six,
go.
but I
That's
guess it all depends, right, on what
right.
you're trying to focus on. But that's awesome. I wrote it down. I literally wrote that down. Go back and listen.
Awesome. All
That's
right. What do
great.
you got for us?
All right. So mine are, I guess, a little different, maybe not unlikely, but as you said earlier, I'm really into going back to find out like my roots of how did I start and really love, guitar. And it really started when I was a kid, right? Probably 7, 8 years old, running into my sister's room and stealing the Beatles Blue album, the 60, 67 to 70, maybe that one.
Yep. Yep. The two
And
greatest hits
just,
albums. There was the red and the blue.
yeah,
Yep.
and putting it on her turntable and listening over and over to every single one of those songs. And it kind of set the foundation to, you'll see some of the other albums that I picked today, but it was the foundation of, wow, this is like, this is amazing music, right? And at whatever it was, 6, 7 years, 8 years old, going in there and feeling like I'm doing something wrong, listening to it, it just set that whole foundation of, this is very, very cool. I like what I'm listening to, and I want this. Like it was just it was fun, and it was my first introduction really into rock and music. That's kind of how I started, by stealing all these great albums from my sister,
So
right?
you're how old and what year?
So if this was I was probably, I want to say 7 or 8 at that time. I was born in 63, right? So yeah,
Right.
so this is probably 69, 70-ish, 71,
Yep.
something like that. Yeah.
My first album was also a Beatles album. Okay, and
Oh, okay.
when I think back about it now, it could have been on my unlikely list, although I was already into them at a young age. But when I think back about it now, I'm shocked that my parents or grandparents, whoever got it for me, got me that album because it was the one where they were full of hair and they were wearing
Oh,
hats and
yeah.
had Old Brown Shoe and Lady Madonna and Hey Jude and everything on it and the Ballad of John and Yoko. You know which one I mean? And it was maybe you know the most counterculture looking picture of them on any of the albums up
Was
until
it
that date.
was it Let It Be?
No, no, it wasn't considered one of the full albums.
Oh, okay.
It was called The Beatles something, and like I said, it had "Can't Buy Me Love," and I know the track list, to my heart, and Lady Madonna and Paperback Writer, and then but the backside was Ballad of John and Yoko, Old Brown Shoe, a bunch of those others, and but like I said, when I just think of that album cover, and
Yeah,
it's the most druggy looking phase of their
yeah.
existence cover, and they were like, "Here you go, don't play it
That's
too loud."
funny. Yeah. Well, and I mean, because that got me into all the Beatles stuff, right? The Abbey Road,
Yep.
all the classic Beatles that I pretty much gave up for 30 years, by the way. But when I was a kid, that was the beginning of, hey, what else is out there, right? But very, very cool stuff, right? And now, 2025, I'm coming full circle back on the guitar and learning all of these Beatles songs that
Nice.
I had played when I first started a few years after that, right? When I was 12, I started. So it's pretty cool.
So are you
Very
self-taught at this point, like when you want to do that, or you have to go and
So,
learn it?
yeah, pretty much. I had the reason, I mean, I was able to get a guitar. My parents said I had to take lessons to get a guitar. You're not just going to get you a guitar, right? So I took lessons, I would say probably for 3 months, if that. And I remember going in, I took lessons from a woman named Kim Strongen, and she was a backup singer for Harry Chapin in Huntington,
Uh-huh.
Long Island. Harry Chapin.
Uh-huh.
Um, and there's lots of stories there because Harry Chapin's wife talked with my mom in school. So there were a lot of
Oh,
connections how we knew Kim. But I remember telling her, I'm like, I just want, I want to play the rock songs and I want to play, I didn't even know what to call it lead back then, but the solos in them. And she taught me some very basic stuff, a couple of D, C, G chords, maybe an E minor here and there. So we were able to play like Eleanor Rigby and some of the Beatles stuff. But it was after that, I think the fourth month, I started a band. And we didn't know anything, right? We just said,
Oh,
let's get together and start, playing. And that's really when you say self-taught. I just learned because back then, obviously, we didn't have the technology, and you just had to have a community of people that would show you how to play the chords. I wasn't reading music at the time. I was reading sheet music that showed me how to position the chords. So I would say I'm 98% self-taught. And when you talk about, when you kind of said, hey, pick six albums, these are the albums that I would listen to over the years over and over again to get those chords and to listen to those solos. And we would push the tape recorder so I could play the solo part of another one. I'm not going to tell you yet, but and I would just listen to that solo in my ear. I would try to figure it out. I didn't know, where I was going. I could kind of hear after a while. It just became like, okay, I know it's a higher note or a low note. I learned all the scales and um, I didn't know if I was doing it right, but it sounded pretty cool. But yeah, that's a long answer to self-taught for
wow,
sure.
that's cool. Very cool. I mean, that's the kind of thing I regret. I mean, a lot of my friends growing up are professional musicians now, and and we watched them, partied with them while they were learning, but they were the ones doing the learning. So,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
righty.
very cool.
All right, let me
Very
pull up
cool.
my next one. Okay, so my next one is from the Rock Love years, and this might be this might be amongst the five moments within the whole Rock Love, the 6 year thing span of the zine that influenced me the most and sort of like got me right here the most. But it wasn't the music so much; it was seeing this band live. So in the early 2000s, there was a band by the name of Faithless. They were an electronic rock band. I believe the brother of Dido is in the band, and they're a dance band. If you listen to some of it, there's a lot of repetition in some of it. But there's just something about it that always got me, especially this album that came out. I think it was their third or fourth album called Sunday 8 p.m. With a song
Mhm.
called "God Is the DJ" on it, which was probably their biggest hit. And I was doing the magazine at the time. And this is a band that played in some of the biggest arenas in Europe, and they were huge in Ibiza and Spain, and again, the whole club scene. They were, I think, they were the apex and the pinnacle of everything at that time. When you think of all those great, that was the early days of those DJs really becoming stars, right? But they weren't DJ. They had a DJ, but they were a band with guitars and
Mhm.
drums and keys and lots of program stuff and whatnot, but always playing in these large places. And so Rock Love was based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. So when the publicist called me and said, "Do you want tickets and a photo pass to go cover Faithless at the Fillmore in San Francisco, which only holds 1,000 people?" I was obviously, and I'm going to have to change this picture because I can't look at myself like this for the whole season behind me. But anyways, so the Fillmore was great because they
Yeah.
were so good to us in the press, and when you would go, you didn't wait in that long line. They'd let you right in, and a lot of times I was there early for interviews and whatnot. I partied with quite a few people on the fire escape just off the side of the stage, doing interviews and whatnot. But these guys I did not get the chance to do that with. However, you go into the Fillmore that night, and there was an energy there that I had never felt. And when I say I've never felt, in this 6 year span for Rock Love, I covered 2,500 shows. So sometimes I was
Wow.
doing double time or three time a day, or if you're at the Warp Tour, you're covering 12 or 15 bands that day. So it adds up and piles up. And my point being that I had a lot to compare it to. When these guys came on, Faithless, when they hit the stage, and from the first notes, I had never felt something so visceral go through me. And then to top it off, I had remember the place only holds 1,000 people, the Fillmore in
Mhm.
San Francisco. This 1,000 people, the thumping, and I had the floor in the Fillmore, which again is on the second, I mean, it's either the second or the third floor of that building, was moving, and which it felt like it was almost going to collapse as it moved in rhythm with these 1,000 people. And it was just this spiritual event for me that when I think of the thousands and thousands and thousands of shows that I've seen, this is in the
That's the
top
one.
five. And yeah, and it's
Yeah.
hard when you start to think, okay, what are the actual order of the top five or top 10 or top 20 or anything? But
Right.
it's in my top group of top shows, and still to this day, if you were to just ask me out of the blue, tell me a show you saw that that out of the blue that had a huge impact on you, I go to that one first because
Yeah.
I immediately just feel the energy and the rhythm, and you're transported to, even though you're in the dirty old dingy Fillmore, which was
Yeah.
a legacy, even though it was a relic, but you're transported to these clubs that I'm talking about in Europe and Ibiza, and the feel and the crowd and the love and the togetherness, and literally this up and down rhythm in unison for 2 hours that I've never felt since.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, when you look at music, right? I mean, you just said it. Like you could ask me right now what my top, performance was or top albums. And even though it's unlikely category, it's pretty likely, right? Because it shaped the way that you're comparing everything else that you're listening to or going to, right?
Yep.
You could say, like what you just described is a perfect example of how music shapes our life and the things that we do, even the hobbies and the things that we like to do and the music we like to listen to and the performances we want to go to. So I think that's it's unlikely for you to say that because I've never heard you talk about this one, but it's not, I'm not surprised, right, that you have these special moments like that. We all do.
Yep. Yep. All right.
So
Let's
I'll
hear
tell
your
you
next
my
good one.
second.
Go for it.
So after I told you about the Beatles, then it became a little bit more listening more towards to the guitar stuff. And then as I got a little bit older, 12, 13, starting to play guitar, it became going to music stores and really finding really cool record shops. And we had one called Titus Oaks. And they had this special, my parents would drop us off, and I'd go with a bunch of my musician friends that we knew three chords, and we looked for these albums that were $1 or $2 in the used racks, which is, and I'm talking now, you're talking about late 70s, early 80s, right? Or late 70s, I should say, late 70s, 76, 77 era. And I found this band called ZZ Top. Blew me away. Blew me away. There was no more, acoustic guitar. Now it's like, and it just happened that there's a Sam Ash next door. I need an electric guitar now, and I want my chorus to sound like, Billy Gibbons playing that, tush, the three chords that just sound great. So I
And it goes
really got,
right through. That stuff went right
oh,
through you, those
it
chords.
was, and I remember it was weird because I kind of have this memory, which I don't even know if it really happened or not, but I'm in there and I'm going through the bins and I see this ZZ Top album and I pick it up and I'm like, man, that's a cool cover. And it's live. And I'm hearing it, right? The guy's playing ZZ Top. Dun, 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 and I'm like, oh, this is mine now. And I mean, to this day, I still have that album, but just how it shaped the type of playing. People that know me know, I mean, I can play a lot of different things, but I'm a hard rock blues player. And it stems from that ZZ Top for sure. There's a lot of those licks that I play, even though I might do them a little differently, but that's my foundation right there. And all the classic guys before, the Hendrix and all that stuff. But ZZ Top was the one that really turned me into, I need to plug in now.
Well, because in a lot of ways they brought us back to a different type of Southern blues than that some of the music had gotten away from up until that point, especially in the 70s.
Exactly, exactly. And there was a big, I guess you could call it a resurrection of those Southern rock bands, which is another one on my list that I'll talk about in a minute. But it just, again, it was putting the needle on that album and listening and going, I think I can do that. And then there was so much going on there that I didn't know as a kid because, again, we didn't have where am I going to get my information from, right? From listening and talking to people. All that slide guitar work that was on there. I always remember playing those notes and I'm like, it just doesn't sound the same. Then I learned how to play slide. Then I got a slide and I'm like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing now. But what I will say is if it was today, I don't think I'd leave the house because of YouTube. It shows you how to play all these songs. It's like,
Right, right.
had that. We used to literally hang out in the guitar stores and watch people play and ask questions for hours. That was our learning, right? But ZZ Top, number two for me.
Wow, man, that's a great choice.
Yeah.
Okay, let me pull up my next one here. I'll come back to that one. Okay, my next one is another Rock Love one,
Oh boy.
and I love the music, but this is an experience I had with the musician that
Okay.
sticks with me forever. And this story I haven't told much before.
Yeah.
I wasn't into this band at all until this album came out, which was I think their fourth album. And then I went back and discovered how great they are. And again, a different type of band for what I was not into the industrial scene at the time. And
Mhm.
this is even before Nine Inch Nails, or maybe right at the beginning of Nine Inch Nails. But there's a band called My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult that are from the Midwest, hardcore industrial band. One of my favorite all-time songs is the song from their first album. I can't remember. Let me look up their first album. Hold on one. Okay, so this album, Sexplosion, which was their first album, and the first song on it, like the second I heard that, that spoke to me. But their fourth album, they went back and they did something that like totally got me because, and this goes back to my childhood. And then I'll tell the story about the musician. Um, One of my favorite episodes of television when I was a kid was this episode of Lost in Space, which, if you remember Lost in Space, the first season was great. It was kind of realish. It was black and white. They would get into like real kind of potential trouble that you would have out in alien worlds and shit. And then the second and third season, when they went color, they got totally campy. And in one of the campy episodes, they went back to Earth. And I forget all the machinations of the story and everything, but they ended up go-go dancing on the top of these pool tables in their little mini skirts and this whole thing. And so when I heard the first chords to My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, their fourth album, I believe it's the fourth album, which is called Hit and Run Holiday, it like transported me right back there. And I was like, oh, I
That's
got to
cool.
find out more about these guys. And again, if you go through that whole album, it's different than their prior stuff, and it's a lot more accessible. And commercial's not the word because it was hardly a huge commercial success or anything, but it is a brilliant album pretty much from start to finish. And like I say, what I love about it, which I think is what a lot of good music does, is to transport you somewhere. And in this case, like I say, it transported me right to that go-go era with that sound. There was that sound sort of in between surf and the Who and Stones and Led
Yep.
Zeppelin, that there was that go-go sound that was a little more campy and almost loungy rock and roll.
Yep. Yep. No, that's cool. That's really cool. So do you still have some of these albums like in your collection, like
Oh
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
original albums?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Have you kept
Yeah.
them all those years or did you like have to go fish for
Just a
them?
few because it was too much to haul around with all the
I
moves,
know. Yeah.
and then as you started replacing everything on CD, then it's what do I do with this and this?
Right. That's
At one
right.
point I was still hauling around cassettes and 8-track, my own homemade cassettes that I would make and 8-track
Sure.
tapes that I would make. So, but yeah, so I don't have many, but some of them, so there are some, you and I should do another one of
Yeah.
these of album art because I have some
Oh yeah.
amazing album art things that those changed my life too. It was like whether I knew the band or not, when you would walk into the record store and flip through, and the art is what would grab you, or the photos or whatnot. So we'll have to come back and do
For
that one
sure.
as well.
For sure. I mean, yeah, we'll definitely want to do that because that shaped, I mean, for me, the whole marketing thing, right? The whole excitement of just looking at new ads and different things, in marketing came from all the things that I learned as a kid and all the things that
Right.
I saw, the artwork and all the posters that came in these. I mean, what a whole amazing time that we got to experience. And now, of course, our kids are kind of experiencing that in a resurrection of LPs, right? And records, at least my
Thank
kids are.
goodness. Yeah, no, no,
And
my
yeah,
kid and grandkid listen to
uh,
records all the time now.
love it because it's just a different way, right? And I
Yep,
think that's what shaped us. So, again, when you ask me about, think about albums, think about things that maybe aren't as common, but they all became common to me because every single song on every single album I have almost tells a story of time in my life and how it shaped me for future things I've done.
yep.
Even productions in the retail business would, you know, I remember doing shows, fashion shows, and picking
Excuse me.
out the music for it. And to me, in my mind, it was like, okay, I want to represent this kind of thing, right? It wasn't so much the top 10 of the day. It was, I want to go back a little bit to what I thought was cool and got me going, right? And let's see if we can get the same thing. But
I mean, even when I was doing Rock Love, when I did the magazine, one of the first things I did in year one was I tracked down the publicist for Roger Dean, and I said, "What do I have to do to interview Roger Dean?" And I eventually did a couple
yeah,
of years later, which just to tell me about all those Yes albums, Yes album covers, which is probably the finest art in rock and roll history.
love it, right? I
Yep.
mean, yeah. You did not walk in a record store in the 70s and not you wanted that Yes album
Yep.
for sure.
Yeah. Sometimes you wanted it just for that, just and people we framed them and everything. So, all
Right.
right, what do you got for your next one?
All right. So the next one, as I told you, now we're looking at about 1976-ish. So I'm 13.
Okay.
I'm really getting into guitar. Now I'm into Aerosmith, Toys in
Okay.
the
Great
Attic.
band,
Again,
Boston.
I know it's a common, probably a great album. Everybody, at least a lot of people know about it, right? I would think. But that album took it a notch even higher than the ZZ Top stuff. And I'm listening to Joe Perry playing all these great licks. You're talking about even the Walk This Way,
Just
Sweet
walk this
Emotion.
way. Yeah.
I mean, and that, yeah. And again, I'm listening like, okay, I feel like I can play, you can listen and after a while you learn to play that. Walk This Way was a little bit easier, but then you listen to things like Sweet Emotion. You're like, okay, there's something else going on here, which got me into, again, through the guitar, a whole different avenue of effects and buying different types of fuzz pedals or octave pedals
Wah,
or,
wah, wah.
yeah, right. Well,
Was
he
what was
was,
he
he was
using in
using,
his mouth? Some sort of harp thing, right in his
I
mouth.
think, yeah, he was using a talk box, and he was also using a wah-wah in that talk box. So he had a little bit. He was doing some crazy stuff. All I had was at that time I did have an electric guitar. I plugged it into an amp. I didn't have all
Right.
those effects, but now it gave me another reason to start talking to people. Well, how does he get that sound? Because I have the notes, but it doesn't sound anything like that. Well, you need this, and this is what's going to give you the sound. I think I was trying to replicate it on a wah pedal. I had an old crybaby wah wah, so when I was playing Toys in the Attic, that thing was, I was pumping it out with some wah, which is really cool.
But how,
But
how
again, now
hard did you find it to learn and reproduce these licks? Because even though they sound simple, they're relatively complicated.
it takes a while. And again, I mean, hundreds of times just lifting that needle up and listening to it, which is what I was saying before. I wound up getting a tape recorder and just trying to tape the section so it was easy to rewind it than do it with the needle. But it takes a long time. And to be quite honest with you, even today, when I listen, I'll say, "Oh, wait, I missed something. There's another note in there." So it's like they were complicated. And remember, you had two guitar players playing
Right.
those parts, so it wasn't always Joe Perry. So when you listen to that album, there's a lot going on, and I'm sure they
And
doubled up a lot of those.
and they
Yeah.
did it without playing on top of each other either, which was amazing.
Well, because they had different octaves and they were playing the rhythm parts were in different places. But those leads, sometimes you'd say, "Oh, Joe Perry's rocking out in this lead," but you find out it wasn't Joe Perry playing it, right? It was Brad Whitford, right? Wasn't he? He was the one playing a
Yep.
lot of
Yep.
those licks too. Um, but again, I go back even today to these old albums and say, okay, did I miss anything? Right? I missed a lot. Right? It wasn't only now the sound and getting the right sound, which was very complicated, but playing the right notes. You miss one note, okay, in a Sweet Emotion, it doesn't sound right.
Right.
It really doesn't. So, the trick notes, I used to call them. There was a little step notes that Joe Perry was famous for, and Just
Well, those are
again,
the things I'm
listening to
talking
them.
about, the complexities that, you hear Walk This Way, it
Oh
sounds
yeah,
like, okay, anybody could do that, but anybody can't do that.
no, no, and you have, and it's the timing too. That was the
Yeah.
other thing. We didn't have time, the machines, and I mean, when we jammed with people, but when you play with that record, it was really hard to get that timing down. You had to get that timing just right because otherwise, it did not sound anything like the record when you played it right by yourself without the background. Um, but
So when
it's just
when you're
it
playing
was
in bands and stuff, are you as young guys all saying, let's try and replicate that, or the ZZ Top stuff, or like, is it that influential?
absolutely. But I'll tell you what, a lot of times what would happen, it was so hard to do. And you had to have the right equipment too, right? You had to have that thundering Marshall sound in the amp. You had to have the right effects. You had to have the distortion boxes. There was a company in Long Island, it's actually in Queens, called Electro Harmonics, which developed all of these fantastic effects that a lot of these rock stars were playing, and they just so happened to be in the local Sam Ashes and local stores, so we could try them out. But back then as a kid, we didn't have money to spend to buy this
Yeah.
stuff. Some rich kid had it. We'd go over his house and we try to, can we borrow that? We're jamming tomorrow. So yes and no. Yes, we tried, but it was if I had recordings of it, you wouldn't know what the song was. We wound up just playing, just wind up jamming. Is what happened.
Oh, fun. That's great. Great
But yeah,
story.
that was definitely a life changer, next level for me, learning those songs and again,
Wow.
uh, playing an instrument, right? Aerosmith
All
for
righty.
sure.
Well, let's see. Well, okay. I'm gonna do this
Mine is
one
so
next
mine
and
are like
see. Yeah,
classic rock albums here. Yeah.
that's so funny. Okay, so my next one is uh my probably my favorite current band, although they're not together anymore. But
Yeah.
they're a early 2000s band. I think I've shared them with you. Um,
Okay.
and here's why I'm going to tell you why it stuck with me. You ever have speaking of learning music and everything when you were younger, you ever have a Casio?
Oh yeah, of course. We all had those. I had the little Casio. Yep. I think I still
Okay.
have it actually. I do have it. I definitely have it. I know exactly where it is.
There you go.
Yes.
Um, so there's a band by the name of Athlete. They were relatively large in Europe. I don't think anybody knows them here. In fact, most people I speak to never heard of them. A lot of my friends, when they hear them, don't like them. I've had a couple friends tell me, I don't like that guy's voice, Joel Pott. I'm in love with his voice. But what struck me about this band was they have an album. There's some of the great albums in my personal repertoire. One of them is Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies, just one of the flat out greatest out of 10 albums of all time, in my opinion. And I trying to mimic them, using them as an influence, whatever. This band Athlete put out what I think is amongst the quintessential albums of this century that's come out so far, an album by the name of Vehicles and Animals. And so I imagine they're doing a play on the Odyssey and Oracle thing, which is why I brought it up. But from the first notes of their songs, they employ a Casio, and they used it a
Yeah.
lot. And a lot of times it would just be for a boop boop, just to get a beat going, even.
Sure.
And again, similar to what I said earlier, just transport you. And this band transports me back to my childhood and that Casio sound and all our little first toy play instruments and
Right.
everything. And however, again, these guys have whatever they put out, 4 or 5 albums, 4 or 5 outstanding albums. In fact, they had a song called Wires that was a single and was on one of the big TV shows. I forget which TV show, but it was like the theme to one of these big TV shows. But again, there's when I started thinking about what were these 6 albums going to be for me, I'm looking for things that influenced me either in different ways or unexpected ways when I came across them. And of the last 25 years, this is without question probably at the top of the list. This album,
It's amazing.
great
Amazing
band.
how we have so
Everybody
much.
go discover Athlete. That's what I would say to you.
Yeah. We got to
So.
write these down so people can go back and listen
Well,
to.
it'll be on
I
this. I'll have them all
I
up on
know.
the
I
screen
love
so
it.
people.
I love it.
So
I'm
okay,
like, I'm
what
trying to keep, you know,
got for us?
again, mine's so heavily influenced on guitar, but I'm going to tell you the
Love it.
next one is this one. I definitely wore the tracks out on this album. Southern rock band. You probably already know what it is. Live album. Lynyrd Skynyrd. One more for from the road. This was
With the
an
16
amazing.
minute version of Free Bird.
Yeah, well, Freebird, right? I mean, it's funny because like kids today, they'll go out and you'll see a band. Like I think I was with my kids this summer and there was a band playing. And what are people always shouting, right? Play Freebird, Freebird, right? They don't even know what it is, probably, but I know what it is because I spent a lot of time as a young youth at 13, 14 years old going back and replaying that specific song and that lead, which I feel like I've got it down really good, right? Still, after all those years. But that was the jam song of junior high for me. Seventh graders, first band, we played that song and everybody wanted it because it was hot. It was a new song. And this is a live, album, right? And that's why it went on for so long. But that whole album was, I remember we had what's his Jeff Goldman was the other guitarist. And we'd go to his house and he had a little more money than we did. And we would go up to his bedroom and he had a great vinyl player and this album. And we would sit there with our guitars and he would put it down. He goes, no, we need to do this. No, hit the rhythm like that. And that's how we practiced our song. He didn't have to do it either. We would just learn together. And then we traded off on the leads. But I mean, that was a big influence, always will be, that album for me. And I know over the years, I wasn't really into Southern rock after a while, but that one early on, and again, the way I looked at these albums is what influenced me early on to love music and to love my hobby that I do, guitar. And that's kind of it was unlikely for people that don't know me, don't even know that I play. This is what really grounded me in my roots of playing. You can hear all this stuff, the blues stuff, the Southern rock stuff, all these licks. Even when I write my own music, I'm playing some of these licks my own way. But this is a classic for me, total classic. I know it's a commercial, sellout, whatever, but
Oh,
this
but it
is
was
to
great.
me
I have a
completely.
couple of things to say about it. First of all, with
Yeah,
all of your band stories, we did a interview a
yeah,
couple of episodes ago with the Spirit of Harmony Foundation people, which is Todd Rundgren's music charity, trying to help save music education. And they cited a bunch of studies and whatnot to us, and what you're telling us in real life, which is, things like being in bands, like being playing sports, teaches you teamwork and cooperation, and even how to deal with failure and whatnot. But also that think about how good all this learning is at this time for your young brain, and it's giving you skills that you use in other areas of your life, whether you use it or not. So I think that's remarkable, hearing your stories.
absolutely.
As far as the songs, not just the live songs, to me what was amazing about Freebird, Green
Yeah,
Grass and High Tides by the Outlaws, some of these 8 and 10 minute songs that the radio was willing to play. It was kind of subversive in a way back then. That sure, it was FM
that's right.
radio, but anything above a 5 minute song was still kind of taboo at that point. Until some of these things came along. Later, you had Bohemian Rhapsody, and all of a sudden you could
Well,
have a 7 to 10 minute song. But
that's right.
Freebird and like Greengrass and High Tides, and these were a couple of the first ones to get away with it.
That's a whole interesting genre to talk about, is the radio. And because again, if we didn't have the money to buy the album, we were with the tape recorder, right? That was borrowed from the school to try to tape it when it came on. We didn't know what the playlist was. We didn't have access to that. But in New York, we had some really good radio stations that would play them. Some of them wouldn't play the long versions, but like WPLJ in New York, classic rock station, NEW, LIR, these were ones that they would play it all, right? They'd play all of these songs, BAB and Babylon.
The
You,
DJs must have
you
loved
can't
it,
even
huh?
think
They get a
about this
10 minute
stuff.
break.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we talk about this and yeah, look, we're older now, but I really feel like it's such a strong musical education because we had to listen. We didn't just, go to Apple Music or Spotify and put what we want on and then I got bored and go to that, which is what we do now. we had to listen to these songs and we had to wait on the radio to say, what are they going to play next? So they said they were going to play the new,
Coming at the
Zeppelin
top of
song.
the
I'm
hour,
waiting,
you had to stick around.
right? And I remember staying up late, King Biscuit, remember like all these live shows.
Yep,
We had Wolfman Jack used to have a show, and then he had the Midnight Special, which
yep.
became a TV show. All of
Tom
this
Kirsch's
stuff.
rock concert.
Oh, the best. That was the best. Absolutely the best. And you talk about like shaping and loving these albums and visuals, right? I didn't even talk about Kiss yet, which I've been up and down with them over the years, but that was a huge influence too because of the visual aspect of what you saw as a kid. It's a 13, 14-year-old kid, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Because I'm hearing the guitars, but I'm also seeing something that's amazing, right? So,
That
but
was
yeah,
my thing going back to the band Faithless that I spoke about earlier.
yeah,
That's another thing about it that amazed me was here's what, at the time I'm 40-ish, here's what
yeah,
these young kids are into today. And again, seeing the unison of it all, that's a good point. That's what made me
yeah,
crazy
for
about
sure.
that. Okay, my next one is from a group of boys out your way, and
Yeah.
this is one of their most unlikely albums. I was not the biggest fan of them. I mean, I loved a couple of their big hits, but I just wasn't the biggest rap and hip hop fan. It just wasn't my thing. I was a classic rock and roller and whatnot. And this album, which is very influential on me, and I listen to constantly now. I didn't even know about it. I think I've discovered it in the last couple of years, last 3 or 4 years. So the Beastie Boys did, they went and put out with zero vocals. It was kind of a film soundtrack. It's called The In Sound from Way Out by the Beastie Boys. And when I talked earlier about those that little disco ping that that you reminded me of and whatnot, this is another one. There's just something about it that is beautiful, still holds the Beastie Boy sound, but to me is also an advancement from what they were doing. And I think by taking the vocals out, it forced them to be much, much more musical, even with their sampling and everything. And if anybody hasn't heard this soundtrack from the Beastie Boys, I highly recommend you go back and give it a spin. It's because there's no vocals, it's even a lovely thing to just have on in the background.
It's fantastic. First of all, you hit another one. It's not on my list today because I did it in decades. This is early I'm talking about, but Beastie Boys, phenomenal. Phenomenal because what you said, right? We grew up in New York, in Queens. This was probably high school, early college, early 80s that everyone in New York was into the Beastie Boys. It's just that it was our guys, three guys that all of a sudden blew up, right? And they were fun. They were like, if you remember the old MTV, the first
Oh,
videos they were
God,
playing,
yeah.
it's like they were like slapstick. So it's like, wait, these guys are funny, and it's a great beat. It just pumped. And all those clubs, I remember those clubs, Danceteria, Palladium in the city were all playing the versions, like you said, without of the Beastie Boy, because the music was so driving, and they'd mix it in the DJs. But great, I just love Beastie Boys. And of course, the film that came out a couple of years ago in the book, if you haven't read it,
Oh, it's great.
highly
Yeah.
suggest.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing like for one of my film projects, if if I could afford to get the rights to that album and you just use it as the soundtrack, I would because that's how
Oh
good it is,
yeah.
and that's
Oh
how
yeah.
well the moods flow from song to song and within songs. That again, you immediately you don't just hear a Beastie Boys album, you hear a film. At least to me, you hear a film soundtrack when you're listening to that.
Totally agree.
What you got?
Um,
What's your number five?
oh boy, this was a tough one because I kicked one of these out of the top six, but they're kind of tied in the fact that how much I listened to them. And we're going to go back to, again, we're staying in that 75, 76 time frame. So you know where I'm going here. Two people in these bands, one band, I'm going to tell you, and the other one, guitar players that influenced me the most to pick up the type of guitar that I fell in love with, which was a Gibson Les Paul. And that
Ooh,
gentleman's name was Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin.
ooh.
And I wore the shit out of the Zeppelin albums, but the one that hit me the most was, and I don't know what, I'm into all these live albums, right? Zeppelin, the live album, Song Remains the Same,
One of the best
was
still.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. And by the way, it was hard to see that movie because it was in the movie theaters. You had to find it at the right place. Your parents had to drop you off, which was also phenomenal. It's like, wow, we're almost seeing Led Zeppelin live the way we're
Right.
watching this. It was really cool. So this was another one, worn the shit out of the vinyl, still have the album. Phenomenal. I can't tell you how many times I would even just look at it, just look at the cover, even though it wasn't a lot going on, but it was a lot going on because you're like, as soon as I open that up, man, this is Led Zeppelin live. There's my boy Jimmy Page. I want to be Jimmy Page, right? Like that's what you want to be when you're starting out and you want that Les Paul.
Have
And
you
I'm
seen
going
the
to
new
tell you that,
documentary on them?
oh, of course.
Becoming Led
Of
Zeppelin?
course.
That was really well done. That was beautifully done.
Get the lead out. That
Yep.
was phenomenal. Obviously, it's streaming now, but fantastic movie. Great, right? Great. And I had a lot of those old clips. They were releasing some DVD stuff years ago. I saw some of those old clips at the beginning, which were really cool. So I'm glad they added more into it. But fantastic. And the tie was the other guitar player, which unfortunately he just passed away, Ace Frehley at Kiss
Yeah.
and Kiss Live. And I'm going to just tell you this quick little story about Kiss Alive.
Go for it.
I think I might have even told you this on the last podcast. We had a music teacher. I was taking a music rock and roll class, Mr. Harris. Did I tell you the story of Mr. Harris?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Mr. Harris. We were in. I think I was a freshman in high school, and it was called Rock. The class was called Rock and Roll, and he opens the class. He doesn't say anything. We're a full class of kids, you know,
How
and he
old?
walks over to the side, and he's got an
How old are you?
I must have been
Teen?
14 maybe.
Okay, young teen. Okay.
13, 14. And we're in this class and we're like, first of all, I can't believe I'm taking a class in high school called rock and roll, whatever, right? It's called the history of rock and roll. So he doesn't say anything. He walks in, it's a new, you know, looks like a normal teacher, I guess, you know, whatever. And he walks to the side of the room and he's got a turntable. He doesn't show us the album. He puts it on and we're like, what the hell's going on? This is how he starts the class. And you hear the vinyl go and he goes, ladies and gentlemen, you wanted the best. You got them. The hottest band in the land, Kiss. And this is loud and everyone's like, what the hell is this? And we're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Of course, I go home and I'm like, I want that album, right? Which I had to get that album. I think it was on.
Yep.
So I got the album. The poster was sitting on my wall. Very influential for me because of the show aspect of it. Because there was high energy rock and roll, easy stuff. It wasn't complicated musician, you know, loving stuff. But to me, this is pretty cool. And I remember there were a lot of people that were good guitar players like, you don't want to listen to that. That's not real music. But to me, it was exciting music. It was good power chords. It had some great riffs. And of course, when you look at the album of Kiss Alive, it comes alive, right? And you watch.
Well, there was literally nothing like that visually.
I mean,
until that point,
I would
nothing.
again. That was another one. I just look at the gatefold.
Remember, Bowie did a little bit of, you know, cross dressing.
Yeah, Bowie did it. Bowie did it.
Like the makeup and the hair and the spikes
and the look of that. You know, the sunburst Les Paul, the same one that Jimmy Page was. So it's like in my head, I'm getting all of these like images of that's what I want. You know, this is it right here. So again, those two tied because I didn't want to leave either one of them out of that influence for me. Not unlikely, but unlikely if you don't know why, right? It wasn't just because the music, I liked all the songs on it, but it influenced me to how I wanted to be and present myself on stage when I played in these garage bands, you know. And I think a lot of people probably can relate to that are our age or my age that were playing in bands, right, at that time.
Totally.
You know, just influence, total influence.
Well, great stuff. Yeah. All right, my last one is a personal one, and this is somebody I kind of grew up with, a little bit to the side. But
Okay.
I actually grew up, her mother was around me when I was growing up. So back in that job, in that fashion business that you and I used to work in together,
Yep.
when I was a young teenager, I was a sock boy there. And I was a troubled young stock boy, getting into a lot of trouble young and starting to party a little too early and everything. And, my parents had been divorced, and then my mother was divorced a second time and on her way to a third one, and yada, 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 bouncing back and forth between the grandparents and my parents. I was a troubled teenager. And however, I did have this after school job, which helped fund my marijuana purchases and my record album purchases, which is all you needed to buy back then, right?
Of course, that's
Family
all you
took
need.
care of drugs and music, and that was good.
That actually all we have that all okay. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so this woman Hazel, who had been a salesperson at the place for 25 or 30 years, I forget how long. Um, she was very nice to me. She would always pull me aside and ask me how I was and counsel me and whatnot. But excuse me, one of the ways she sort of gave you hope in life was to tell us these continuing tales about her daughter. Her daughter's name was Dale. At the time, her pre-married name was Dale Consalvi. And her daughter was a fucking hot, a serious hottie, like 5 feet tall. She looked like Jean Harlow. I mean, she was amazing looking. Yeah, she and she was a Playboy bunny. And back then, we had the Playboy clubs in every city, and you had
Right.
the hot girls in their little bunny outfits running
Yep.
around serving drinks and cigars and shit. And in 1975, she was the Playboy Bunny of the Year in Boston. And somehow, because of being that, when he came through Boston, she was able to meet Frank Zappa. And I forget the whole story, but at one point she said to Frank Zappa, I am going to work with you. And they go their separate ways. And so after being the Playboy Bunny of the Year, they send her to Hollywood to interview with Hugh Hefner because, you go from local to national, right? And the whole
Yep.
Playboy enterprise sphere, whatever they had going on back then. And she goes to Hollywood and she goes to the Playboy Mansion. And I don't recall the results of that or whether it worked out or whatnot. But from there, she goes and she ends up back with, finds Frank Zappa. And Frank's like, Dale, what are you doing here? And, you know, and one thing leads to another. Now, again, this woman Hazel is telling us, like every couple of days you come in and you hear the next stories about her daughter. Because the second she was involved with Frank Zappa, who was like, one of our subversive rock and roll heroes. Whether you liked his music or not, you loved just the fact that he was fuck the system and everything. Um, and so now she's hooking up with Zappa, and he brings her into his company, for lack of a better term, his group. And now he puts out this two-part album called Joe's Garage. And she sings the
Mm.
part of this gal Mary on it. If you recall the song Valley Girl and
Yeah.
everything, that's her all
Of
over it.
course. Of
And
course.
and whatnot. Well, one of the guys, again and again, I want to tell this story in the vein of I'm sitting here listening to this older woman, my mother's age, regaling us regularly. And she was so proud of her daughter. And she had a strained, troubled relationship with her daughter as it was. And that's a whole nother story. Um, but one of the guys in the band was a drummer by the name of Terry Bozzio, who is, I think, one of the best drummers in the world still to this day. Highly, highly underrated. If your chops could keep up with what Zappa was doing and the signature and time changes and everything, you're obviously professional
Oh
and
yeah.
good. And obviously, and I've told this story in that fashion podcast. So as fate would have it, Dale and Terry fall in love and become Mr. and Mrs. Terry Bozzio. And then they take Warren Cucurullo and Patrick O'Hearn, who were both in the Zappa orbit as well, and they leave and they form this band called Missing Persons, which between 1980, 1981, and 1985, they had one hit after another. Unbelievable string of success in this amazing
Yep.
short time. And remember, that was a time too where people rocketed it up and crashed, and you
Right.
never heard from them again. But their first album, which is called Spring Session M, again, it you hear from a lot of my stories, there are things that, like with yours, that flood you back to your youth, right? So when I
Sure.
hear Walking in LA and Destination Unknown and even their cover of The Doors, I Love You, which I didn't love that cover, but I just love that they were doing it.
Yeah.
Like I say, I hear this and I'm transported back. And I'd met Dale a couple of times, and I was actually very friendly with Dale's brother, Brian Consalvi, who Hazel had introduced me to. And Brian and I shared a tremendous affinity for weed. And Brian did this thing for a while where he got involved with somebody, and making uh, they were making synthetic hashish. I don't know what the fuck it was made of, but it smelled like hash and it tasted like hash
Yeah.
and it got you high like hash. And Brian got arrested for doing that and went
Oh
to
boy.
prison for a short time. But he and I were really good friends. He was
Yeah.
one of the nicest people I ever met. But again, I just think of, you know, whenever I see Dale in the news still these days, she's still doing shows out west and whatnot. I get transported right back to that and right back to that fashion business we were in, and a kid, and the troubled kid, and the party troubled kid, and this woman, trying to help me by saying, look at what my daughter's doing, and it was kind of a you can do it too implicitly without saying it, and that was the lesson that came out of it.
That's awesome. That's a great story. That's great. Great. So are you in contact? I
I've
think you said you met her.
yeah, well, I met her a few times. We've texted a few times and whatnot, and I was telling her about stories about her mother and her brother that I don't know if she had ever heard from when we were in the fur business. She knew all the other fur salespeople that were there in that store
Oh,
because
that's funny.
we were all following her, and her mother and that group of salespeople. They were the biggest friggin' partiers, with the drinking that you ever saw, and they were always together for
Wow.
dinners and at each other's houses, and so there was this very close-knit group there outside of the management who were the ball busters, including my grandfather. But we all watched this gorgeous, beautiful young girl blossom into the fucking rock
Yeah,
star. It was amazing.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's cool, right? I mean, yeah.
yeah,
Again, influence all throughout. All
yeah.
right. Well, my last one I'm going to leave you with is also in that 76, 77 era. And you said Boston, and that's who it is. The Boston first album.
What
There
a
was so much.
magnificent
I know.
masterpiece.
I remember even back then, right? Not having all the social media tools that we have anywhere near. All we have is newspapers and underground papers like Rock Love, right? We used to have something called Good Times in Long Island that would have all the bands and what new things were coming and all the reviews. And we waited for this. We heard about Tom Schultz and doing this Boston album, and it finally came out. I think it was 76-ish,
Well, it was like,
77.
what do you mean they're MIT engineers? What the fuck is that?
Well, right. That was the other thing. But I remember going in, it was a newer record. It wasn't Titus Oaks. It was a new, all of a sudden, all these record stores would come, and this was a new album. And I went to get the album, and I think it was like on a Friday after school. And I went over to my buddy Brian's house, and we hung out the whole weekend and just listened to it over and over and over. And it's amazing. Like you turn it on, it was more than just a rock band playing. There were synthesizers going. We were just listening to it, probably altered states also, but just hearing all of that was just amazing. And
You
those
know what was
guitars,
brilliant about it to me though? Because you've talked about this the whole show.
yeah.
Distortion and wah-wah pedals
Oh
and
yeah.
feedback. Well, this was clean and crisp, and there was just
But it was
something
such
about
a
the
crisp sound.
production.
It was
It was what?
such a the sound was so good that it was hard to replicate.
Right.
I mean, you could replicate some of the acoustic stuff, but more in the feeling, but you needed the 12 string to make it sound right. But some of those songs, Peace of Mind, any of those, he was clean, but it was his unique tone. It was very hard. I remember people trying to get that tone. It was hard. It was so compressed, and it was just digitized the way he was back then in the 70s doing it. But you're right. It was clean and
Well,
it was
that's where
good.
their engineering background like really came
Oh
into
yeah.
taking that finished product to the next level. So I mean, that is probably
Fantastic.
one of my
Yeah.
25 top albums of all time still.
Yeah, that's a fantastic one. Fantastic. Love
And
it.
then with the
Um,
foreplay long time, there's another seven and a
oh,
half minute song at the
I
radio.
know.
Nobody was afraid to play it.
It was Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Great album. Huge influence. Kept me going with guitar. It was just like, it was like a gift. Every month another album like this would come out. You're like, oh, like I didn't realize how important it was going to be for me, personally, playing and being able to experience it when it first came out. And it's funny, like you watch now on YouTube some of these like first time listening to an album,
I love
right?
that.
And the
Yeah,
kids, yeah, they're like 18 years old, whatever. They're like, no, I've never heard of this. What's this Boston thing? They turn it on. It's just like they're blown away. It's like, well, we had the same feel. Like that's how we were,
right,
right?
right,
When we first
exactly.
heard that, we're like, wow.
Yep.
So anyway, that was my my albums of influence, unlikely or likely maybe for a guitar
And
player.
that I also think that's a great example of a game changer album that was nearly impossible to follow up. And while their second and third albums were good, they were close to that.
It was even hard for them to right for them
Right,
to follow up. Yeah, but playing it live for them, it was
right.
hard. I remember the concerts when they would try to replicate it. It was hard, man. You had to have some pre-recorded tracks to get it to sound just like that,
Yep.
right? Because Tom Schultz was inventing some of those effect pedals too, which he had a whole line of after that. But yeah,
Wow.
very cool, cool
Great
stuff.
choice. Great choice. All right, that was lots of fun. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for doing this
of
with me today.
course,
We will have to come back and I think we've got two or three other topic series we thought of while we were
yes,
doing this. So, all right, Jeff
absolutely.
Becker, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Jeff Becker for joining me for that. We will definitely have to ask him back for more. I love his perspective. It's so different than mine because I was not a musician at all. I was a music fan. So, on to our reminiscing for this week's episode of the show, talking about a old issue, a vintage issue. It sounds weird saying that, a vintage issue of RockLove Magazine. This time from November of 1997. And by now, the magazine is hitting its stride. It's got plenty of in with all the big publicists that control access to the bands and access to the venues. We're in a full color situation in the magazine, and we have access, as I said. So one day, I'm sitting in my office and I get a call from one of these publicists, and they said, on the wharf in San Francisco, if you're interested, Rick Ocasek of the Cars, who has a new solo album, will be doing interviews. Shall we book you for one of them? And I was like, absolutely. And I will even commit to putting him on the cover of the magazine because I was a huge Cars fan and a huge Rick Ocasek fan. So they had me meet him on the wharf. I can't remember the name of the restaurant. Doubt it's still there anymore. But we had cocktails and hors d'oeuvres for about 90 minutes. And it was one of the most fun times I had during the life of the magazine, just talking about music, talking about this man's amazing career, talking about all the places and things and experiences he'd had with this band. Look at, as you see the full article that we had in there for that. And as I said, we're also starting to cover many higher bred acts by this point in the magazine's arc. We're getting access to A-listers, and it's a difficult time because we were also trying to figure out who we were and straddling the line between zine and magazine. And as I've said before, I think that's kind of where we went wrong. But we were talking to people like John Anderson of Yes. We were talking to people like Kurt Smith of Tears for Fears about his solo project. These guys were doing solo projects at that time in the mid 90s. John Anderson of Yes had this amazing project called Toltec that I used to listen to all the time. In our livestock section, where we covered live shows, you can also see that our influence and our ability to gain access to bigger and better acts is growing. Todd Rundgren, Ed Kowalczyk's Live, U2, Seahorses, which was John Squire's band. I loved Seahorses, Aerosmith. I mean, these are A-listers that we're getting access to. But one of our favorite bands and side projects that we covered almost all of their albums during the course of the Rock Love run was that of the band Brad, which was a side project with Stone Gossett of Pearl Jam, as well as friends of ours from the band Satchel, as I've told in stories on the podcast, Regan Hagar and Sean Smith, who unfortunately passed away in the last year or two, and so sad to have him not with us anymore. Also Echo and the Bunnyman in that episode, and I won't tell you here, but I have a fabulous story about myself and the guitarist Will of Echo and the Bunnymen, what he put me through to get him to sit down and calm down for 60 minutes so we could have this discussion. A great story I will tell at another time. The Dandy Warhols were one of our favorite bands from the beginning of the magazine. You know, their second album, which is what really took off for them with the song "Boys Better" and "Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth," came out right around 1995, and so they were part of the rock love orbit from the get go, and we loved this band from Portland and how different they were and what they put out there. Also, we're starting to put more emphasis on the photography we had in the magazine, doing things like a fashion shot in every month's episode. This one with David Byrne of Talking Heads, Michael Franti and Spearhead, again, one of the early bands that Rock Love very much got into, different, fusing a little bit of rap with a little bit of soul, with a little bit of R&B, with a lot of rock, and just a magnificent sound that to this day, Michael Franti and Spearhead are still out there touring, and I highly recommend you go see. And as we talked about in the podcast interview with Jeff and I discussing albums that had influence on us, I mentioned my story about Dale Bozio and Terry Bozio. And in this episode, in this issue of the magazine, Terry Bozio went and did a side project with Tony Levin and Steve Stevens, which was a great album, as I recall. I have not listened to that in quite some time, but just seeing it here makes me want to go and replay it yet again. And that's the whole point of some of what we're doing here. So that'll do it for today's episode of the Rock Love Podcast, where we take a look back at the magazine, the zine that ran from 1995 to 2001. I'm Scott. I can't thank you enough for joining me again. I hope you got as much fun out of listening to those record selections and influence selections that Jeff and I did. Jeff and I had as much as I did. I did warms the cockles, as I said. Nothing like the good old rock and roll. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next episode. My name is Scott. This is the Rock Love Magazine Podcast.